back for episode 12, 10 minutes of cold reading a night from the Anarchist Handbook, organized by Michael Malice, the paper copy. And we're starting off on page 39. This is Herbert Spencer from Social Statics, 1851. We're jumping in about halfway down page 39. 3. Upholders of pure despotism may fitly believe state control to be unlimited and unconditional. They who assert that men are made for governments and not governments for men may consistently hold that no one can remove himself beyond the pale of political organization. But they who maintain that the people are the only legitimate source of power, that legislative authority is not original but deputed, cannot deny the right to ignore the state without entangling themselves in an absurdity. For if legislative authority is deputed, it follows that those from whom it proceeds are the masters of those on whom it is conferred. It follows further that as masters they confer the said authority voluntarily. And this implies that they may give or withhold it as they please. To call that deputed, which is wrenched from men whether they will or not, is nonsense. But what is here true of all collectively is equally true of each separately. As a government can rightly act for the people only when empowered by them, so also can it rightly act for the individual only when empowered by him. If A, B, and C debate whether they should employ an agent to perform for them a certain service, and if while A and B agree to do so, C dissents, C cannot equitably be made a party to the agreement in spite of himself. And this must be equally true of 30 as of 3. And if of 30, why not of 300 or 3,000 or 3 million? 4. Of the political superstitions lately alluded to, none is so universally diffused as the notion that majorities are omnipotent. Under the impression that the preservation of order will ever require power to be wielded by some party, the moral sense of our time feels that such power cannot rightly be conferred on any but the largest moiety of society. It interprets literally the saying that, quote, the voice of the people is the voice of God, and transferring to the one the sacredness attached to the other, it concludes that from the will of the people, that is, of the majority, there can be no appeal. Yet is this belief entirely erroneous. Suppose for the sake of argument that, struck by some Malthusian panic, a legislature duly representing public opinion were to enact that all children born during the next 10 years should be drowned. Does anyone think such an enactment would be warrantable? If not, there is evidently a limit to the power of a majority. Suppose again that of two races living together, Celts and Saxons, for example. The most numerous determined to make the others their slaves. Would the authority of the greatest number be in such case valid? If not, there is something to which its authority must be subordinate. Suppose once more that all men have incomes under 50 pounds a year. Suppose once more that all men having incomes under 50 pounds a year were to resolve upon reducing every income above that amount to their own standard, and appropriately the excess for public purposes. Could their resolution be justified? If not, it must be a third time confessed that there is a law to which the popular voice must defer. What then is that law, if not the law of pure equity, the law of equal freedom? These restraints, which all would put to the will of the majority, are exactly the restraints set up by the law, by that law. We deny the right of a majority to murder, to enslave, or to rob, simply because murder, enslaving, and robbery are violations of that law, violations too gross to be overlooked. But if great violations of it are wrong, so also are smaller ones. If the will of the many cannot supersede the first principle of morality in these cases, neither can it in any. So that, however insignificant the minority, and however trifling the proposed trespass against their rights, no such trespass is permissible. When we have made our Constitution purely democratic, thinks to himself the earnest reformer, we shall have brought government into harmony with absolute justice. Such a faith, though perhaps needful for the age, is a very erroneous one. By no process can coercion be made equitable. The freest form of government is only the least objectionable form. The rule of the many by the few we call tyranny. The rule of the few by the many is tyranny also, only of a less intense kind. You shall do as we will and not as you will is in either case the declaration. And if the 100 make it to 99, instead of the 99 to the 100, it is only a fraction less immoral. Of two such parties, whichever fulfills this declaration necessarily breaks the law of equal freedom. The only difference being that by the one it is broken in the persons of 99, while by the other it is broken in the persons of 100. And the merit of the democratic form of government consists solely in this, that it trespasses against the smallest number. The very existence of majorities and minorities is indicative of an immoral state. The man whose character harmonizes with the moral law we found to be one who can obtain complete happiness without diminishing the happiness of his fellows. But the enactment of public arrangements by vote implies a society consisting of men otherwise constituted, implies that the desires of some cannot be satisfied without sacrificing the desires of others, implies that in the pursuit of their happiness, the majority inflict a certain amount of unhappiness on the minority, implies, therefore, organic immorality. Thus, from another point of view, we again perceive that even in its most equitable form, it is impossible for government to dissociate itself from evil, and further that, unless the right to ignore the state is recognized, its acts must be essentially criminal. That a man is free to abandon the benefits and throw off the burdens of citizenship may indeed be inferred from the admissions of existing authorities and of current opinion. Unprepared as they probably are for so extreme a doctrine as the one here maintained, the radicals of our day yet unwittingly profess their belief in a maxim which obviously embodies this doctrine. Do we not continually hear them quote Blackstone's assertion that, quote, no subject of England can be constrained to pay any aids or taxes, even for the defense of the realm or the support of government, but such as are imposed by his own consent, or that of his representative in Parliament. And what does this mean? It means, say they, that every man should have a vote. True, but it means much more. If there is any sense in words, it is a distinct enunciation of the very right now contended for, in affirming that a man may not be taxed unless he has directly or indirectly given his consent. It affirms that he may refuse to be so taxed, and to refuse to be taxed is to cut all connection with the state. Perhaps it will be said that this consent is not a specific, but a general one, and that the citizen is understood to have assented to everything his representative may do when he voted for him. But suppose he did not vote for him. And on the contrary, did all in his power to get elected someone holding opposite views. What then? The reply will probably be that by taking part in such an election, he tacitly agreed to abide by the decision of the majority. And how if he did not vote at all? Why then he cannot justly complain of any tax, seeing that he made no protest against its imposition. So curiously enough, it seems that he gave his consent in whatever way he acted, whether he said yes, whether he said no, or whether he remained neuter. A rather awkward doctrine, this. Here stands an unfortunate citizen who is asked if he will pay money for a certain proffered advantage, and whether he employs the only means of expressing his refusal or does not employ it. We are told that he practically agrees, if only the number of others who agree is greater than the number of those who dissent. And thus we are introduced to the novel principle that A's consent to a thing is not determined by what A says, but by what B may happen to say. It is for those who quote Blackstone to choose between this absurdity and the doctrine above set forth. Either his maxim implies the right to ignore the state, or it is sheer nonsense. And I'm going to go ahead and call it a day there on page 42. Again, this is reading from the essay Social Statics by Herbert Spencer in 1851 in Chapter 5 of the Anarchist Handbook, organized by Michael Malice. We'll see you later.